Hello, I'm Olly and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, my 10 favourite horror reads of 2024. So this is the third in a series of videos I'm doing about my most memorable reads of 2024. So books I read in 2024 rather than books that were published in 2024. So you've already had on Sunday my least favourite books of the year, the most disappointing books I read this year. And yesterday you had my 10 favourite crime reads of this year. So today, my 10 favourite horror reads of 2024. And I will go through this list in no particular order, but then finish with my favourite horror book of the year. So the first book I want to talk about is The Witnesses Are Gone by Joel Lane, which was a super creepy cursed movie book. I love books about cursed movies, and this was a great example. So about a guy who finds these VHS cassettes in a house that he's moved into with these weird kind of experimental films on them. A super creepy story as he gradually kind of tries to discover more about the director of these films. Had some really interesting ideas, these books. Some very kind of weird nightmarish scenes, but overall just a really effective weird horror book. The next book is one that's not even out yet, so this comes out in January 2025, and it's a great read. It's Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. So it's not perfect, it's probably a bit longer than it needed to be, and I didn't always feel like the horror elements of the book worked perfectly, but the other elements of the book are fantastic. So it's set in the 1970s, and it's about a home where unmarried young women who are pregnant are sent to kind of wait out the term of their pregnancy and then have their babies, and the babies are then given up for adoption. So it's a really kind of hard-hitting subject, and it's handled really sensitively by Grady Hendrix. I think he does a great job of writing about these young women and describing the ordeal that they're going through. There's a lot of humanity in this book. It's very moving. There is a strong horror element to it as well, as you'd expect from Grady Hendrix, and as I say, that didn't always work perfectly. But overall, the book packed such an emotional punch that it really did link with me. I think it's a really enjoyable and interesting read. Next up, a novella that came out this year, Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy. Nat Cassidy is such a great new voice in horror. I really am enjoying his stuff, and this was no exception. So this is a short, incredibly fast-moving book about this guy who stops at a rest stop and gets trapped in the restroom, in the toilet, in the rest stop, whilst weird and horrible stuff is going on outside of that restroom. And it's about him trying to escape and trying to, or just trying to survive, basically. It's really fast-paced, it's really gripping, it's really graphic and nasty at times. I thought it was fantastically tense and enjoyable. Next, we have another book which I think came out in 2024, Letters to the Purple Satin Killer by Joshua Chaplinksy. A really interesting kind of twist on true crime. So, completely fictional, but examines the true crime genre in a really interesting way. So the concept for this book is there's this guy, a serial killer called the Purple Satin Killer, who is in prison. And the book is a series of letters that are written to him by various people. For example, one is his mother, one's a detective who was investigating the case, one is a victim who managed to escape. It's a really interesting examination of our obsession with true crime. I thought it was a book that could easily not have worked, but actually it works brilliantly. I think Joshua Chaplinksy did something really interesting here. And if you're interested in kind of thinking a bit more about true crime, it's definitely one I would recommend. Next then, something a bit different, a children's book. So this is a book that was sent to me by the author for review, and I just thought it was wonderful. So the book is called Cruel Nature, and it's by an author called D.B. Albiza. So D.B. Albiza is a teacher, and she wrote this book to encourage her kids to read. So it's a collection of short, creepy horror stories, kind of in the vein of kind of Goosebumps or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. but they're brilliantly done. They're really, really nicely done. They are genuinely creepy at times. There's some wonderful illustrations in this book as well, and it's wonderfully packaged. It's just a really nice, fun little collection of horror stories, and I really admire the motivation behind it. Next we have some folk horror, That Which Stands Outside by Mark Morris. So this was a really great slow burn horror novel. So it starts with this guy rescuing a young woman from being attacked. They start a relationship and he ends up travelling with her to her home, which is an island off the coast of Iceland. And when he gets there, the local people are really suspicious of this young woman, and it's about him kind of trying to figure out why, trying to figure out what's going on. And there's this gradual build-up of horror throughout the book that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the book progresses. It's a really great example of how to gradually build mystery and tension in a horror novel. I thought it was a very, very enjoyable read. The next book is one I debated whether I should put on this list, because in many ways it's a terrible book, but it really left an impression on me and I had a fantastic amount of fun reading it. The book is Eat Them Alive by Pierce Nace. So this is a book that came out in the 80s and it's about a guy who is trying to get revenge on the world, basically. So he's had something really terrible happen to him that has left him incredibly angry and grumpy. He lives on a Caribbean island, and on that island there's an earthquake and the ground splits open and these giant praying mantises come out of the ground and start eating people. He befriends one of the giant praying mantises and goes on a revenge spree with it, using it to get revenge on basically everyone he meets. It's incredibly graphic, incredibly ridiculous, but also incredibly fun. I really do recommend it. Next, something more modern and a little bit more serious, although not totally serious. That is Osgood As Gone by Cooper S. Beckett. So this is the first in a series of books. The fourth one is about to come out. I've read the other two that are out already and really, really enjoyed them. But this is my favourite of the series. So it's about this young woman, Prudence Osgood, who is a spectral investigator. So basically a ghostbuster. So it's kind of a modern occult detective kind of story. She is very, very queer. There's lots of stuff in these books about her relationships and things like that. She's also very self-destructive. So she makes for a really interesting central character. But the real star of this book is the mystery and the horror. It really got under my skin. It's very, very creepy at times, and it ends with a fantastic cliffhanger that really sets things up brilliantly for the next book. So a really enjoyable kind of new example of occult detective fiction. I really, really love this series and I can't recommend it highly enough. Next then, the final book before I announce my favourite horror read of the year. This was Maynards House by Herman Raucher, which I think came out in the 70s. This is a weird kind of folk horror story about this guy who's returning from Vietnam. One of his buddies in Vietnam died over there and left him this house, which is in Maine in the middle of nowhere. And he goes there in winter and spends time in this house, and increasingly weird stuff happens to him while he is there. There's one element, so I read this as a group read with a bunch of other people. There's one element of this book which is very icky indeed, and a lot of people had a lot of problems with. But I felt like it kind of fit the story overall. But yeah, a very creepy and interesting and kind of hypnotic book. Beautifully written at times. I really thought it was an interesting kind of folk horror style of read. And the kind of wintry Maine setting is brilliantly done as well. You do feel that sense of complete isolation at times as this guy is basically gradually going crazy in this cabin away from civilization. So now we get to my favourite horror read of the year then, which is All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Nevill. I really thought this was a fantastically tense and enjoyable horror novel. It's kind of a blend of sci-fi and horror, so it's an alien invasion story and a story that starts with most of humanity getting taken by the aliens, basically, and this one guy surviving. And the thing that's really interesting about the central character is he's a perfectly ordinary guy. In fact, in some ways, he's like below average. I think he's described, or has been described by Adam Nevill, as the last person you would pick to be on your sports team. He's basically kind of a bit useless, but as the book progresses, he really grows as a character, and his determination to survive and to protect the people he meets is really, really well done. It also has some really great weird aliens. Adam Nevill always does a great job with the creatures in his books, and this is no exception. The aliens are really bizarre, really weird, and wonderfully well imagined. So there you have my 10 favourite horror reads of the year. Do let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought of them. Let me know your favourite horror read in 2024. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.